Picture yourself in your favorite chair, morning light streaming through familiar windows, when suddenly someone poses a question that makes your heart skip. Not because it's shocking, but because of its unexpected depth. The person asking isn't a stranger. It's someone you've watched grow from a child into something approaching adulthood. This happened to me recently, and the memory still makes me pause. But first, I'm curious. Where are you reading this from today? I always wonder about the places these words find their way to. It was mid-September, one of those crisp afternoons where autumn whispers its arrival through golden light. I'd spent the morning organizing my craft room, a task I tackle when my thoughts need sorting too. The house carried the scent of apple cake from my earlier baking session. My neighbor Sarah had stopped by to drop off some borrowed books, bringing along her son Michael. At 19, he'd grown tall and lanky, caught between teenage awkwardness and adult confidence. I could still see traces of the 10-year-old who used to build forts in my backyard with cardboard boxes and endless imagination. Sarah received an urgent call from her office, something about covering for a sick colleague, and found herself rushing away, asking if Michael could wait at my place until she finished. This wasn't unusual. He'd spent countless afternoons here over the years, usually content with old magazines or helping in the kitchen while sharing stories about college and his weekend job. Today felt different, though. I noticed it in how he hovered near the doorway, shoulders tense beneath his worn denim jacket. His eyes would meet mine briefly before darting away, as if wrestling with unspoken thoughts. "Everything all right?" I asked, setting down the dish towel I'd been folding. He shrugged, hands fidgeting with his phone. "Just thinking through some stuff," I smiled gently. "Sounds serious. Want to talk about it?" After a moment's hesitation, he settled into the chair beside mine. His elbows found the table's surface, eyes studying the wood's natural patterns, as though searching for courage in its grain. Then, without warning, he spoke. "Do you think some people are meant to spend their lives never really being?" "Understood." The question hung between us like morning mist, delicate and meaningful. I set down my cup carefully, recognizing this wasn't casual conversation. The weight in his voice spoke of genuine contemplation, not teenage drama seeking. I joined him at the table. "That's quite a question, Michael." A flush crept up his neck. "Yeah, I know it sounds heavy. I've just been wondering lately about all this talk of finding your soulmate or whatever. Like, what if some people just don't? What would that feel like?" I could tell this wasn't idle curiosity. Something specific had planted this seed of worry. Perhaps a book, a film, or someone in his orbit who seemed perpetually lonely in ways he couldn't grasp. "Well," I said slowly, "maybe understanding doesn't always come from one perfect person. Sometimes different people see different pieces of who you are." His gaze lifted, and I caught a glimpse of something hopeful, mixed with uncertainty. This wasn't philosophical musing for him. It was deeply personal. Sunlight shifted across our joined hands on the table. A cardinal called from somewhere in the maple trees, and the lingering sweetness of my baking seemed almost too rich in the weighted silence. "Were you ever scared of ending up alone like that?" he asked quietly. The question touched something tender in my chest. I thought about relationships that had promised understanding but fell short, about friendships that illuminated certain corners of my soul while leaving others in shadow, about learning to appreciate my own company. "Yes," I admitted, but I discovered that the fear itself can make you treasure connection more when it does appear, even in unexpected forms. He nodded thoughtfully, filing this away like a token he'd examine later in private moments. The oven timer's chime broke our reverie. I rose to retrieve the apple cake, its golden surface gleaming as I placed it on the cooling rack. Michael relaxed slightly in his chair, though I sensed his thoughts hadn't strayed far from our conversation. I wondered what had triggered these concerns and whether this marked the beginning of a discussion we hadn't fully explored yet. The remainder of that afternoon carried an unusual quality. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged like air before thunderstorms. Michael wandered to my bookshelf, fingers trailing across spines without really reading titles. I busied myself tidying the kitchen, but my mind kept circling back to his question. I've known Michael for nearly a decade, yet I realized how little I understood about his inner landscape these days. 19 is an age where life feels simultaneously infinite and constricting, where you're mature enough to glimpse harsh realities but young enough to feel ambushed by them. Eventually, I found him on the sofa, staring at the muted television. Late afternoon light painted golden edges around his dark hair. He looked contemplative, jaw set with familiar stubbornness inherited from his mother. I settled into the armchair across from him. "Michael, can I ask what prompted your question earlier?" He paused, fingers working at a loose thread on the cushion. "It's my mom, actually. She's constantly busy with work, and when she's home, she just seems empty. I don't think she has anyone she really connects with anymore. She laughs around people, but it feels hollow, not like when Dad was around." His matter-of-fact tone made my heart ache. I knew Sarah's divorce had been difficult, but I'd never considered how it appeared through her son's eyes. "That must be painful to witness," I said softly. "Yeah, and it makes me wonder if that's my future too. Just going through motions without really living." His words settled heavily between us. I understood now that his question wasn't solely about romantic love. It was about the fear of becoming invisible within your own existence. "You know," I said, leaning forward, "I think part of it is nurturing the aspects of yourself that matter, regardless of who's watching. Sometimes the right connections happen when you're already complete on your own." He studied me as if evaluating whether to trust this perspective. I could almost see thoughts turning over in his mind. The room grew, quieter except for the refrigerator's gentle humming. Outside, shadows lengthened as evening approached, carrying the first hints of cool air through open windows. I assumed our conversation had concluded when he surprised me again. "Has anyone ever truly understood you? Completely, I mean." I drew a careful breath, feeling the answer surface unbidden. "Yes," I said finally, "but it wasn't permanent. Sometimes people can see you clearly for a while, then circumstances shift. That doesn't diminish what was real, it just means it belonged to a specific time." His eyes remained on mine, as though measuring the honesty in my response, searching for hidden meanings or reluctant admissions. Then he looked away, expression softening marginally. "I think I understand that," he said. We didn't speak much after that. I prepared tea for both of us, and we sat as daylight faded, each lost in separate thoughts. But I had the distinct impression that whatever troubled him remained only partially revealed, and that the rest would emerge eventually, whether I felt prepared or not. When Sarah returned that evening, Michael's demeanor seemed lighter, as if some internal pressure had eased without disappearing entirely. But watching them drive away, I couldn't escape the feeling that our conversation had opened something between us, and I wasn't certain what I might discover there. The following week moved with peculiar slowness, days stretching just enough for my thoughts to return repeatedly to Michael's words. I'd find myself folding laundry or brewing morning tea and suddenly recall him at my kitchen table, eyes fixed on wooden grain, asking whether some people never find understanding. I didn't see him again until Friday evening. Sarah called, apologetic about short notice, but another work crisis required her attention. Could I keep Michael company for a few hours? I agreed immediately, though this time I felt more conscious of what might simmer beneath his quietness. When he arrived, he carried a battered notebook tucked under one arm. I'd never known him to be artistic, but he placed it carefully on the coffee table like something precious. "What's that?" I asked as he sat down. He hesitated, then offered a small shrug. "Just some drawings I've been working on." I didn't press, but after a moment, he slid the book toward me and opened it. Inside were pages of pencil sketches, faces mostly, some detailed, others barely begun. One particular drawing caught my attention. A woman's profile, gentle and reflective, with lines suggesting wisdom rather than age. "She looks familiar," I murmured, studying the careful shading. Michael smiled slightly. "It's you, sort of. I mean, I didn't try for an exact likeness. More like how you appeared when we talked last week." I felt an unexpected warmth bloom in my chest. Not from flattery, but from realizing I'd been observed with care I hadn't anticipated. "You captured something genuine," I said quietly. "I don't know what exactly, but it feels true." He relaxed visibly, relieved I hadn't dismissed or mocked his effort. Drawing helps me work through things I can't express with words. I closed the notebook gently. Then you should keep at it. Sometimes we need ways to communicate beyond language. He nodded, but his gaze lingered on me with an intensity that felt charged, the same electricity I'd sensed in the kitchen that first day. We shifted to lighter topics, music, classes, the absurd cost of textbooks, but the underlying tension never fully dissipated. As the evening progressed, he seemed more comfortable, yet I could tell he remained circling around unspoken thoughts. Only when I walked him to the door did he pause and turn back, voice dropping low. You know, you're the only person who really hears me when I talk. The words caught me off guard. My hand tightened on the doorframe as I searched for an appropriate response. Something vulnerable in his tone felt both touching and fragile, like crystal in my palms. That means more than you know, Michael, I said finally, keeping my voice gentle. But you should realize you deserve multiple people who listen to you properly. He nodded, though a flicker in his expression suggested my answer hadn't quite reached where he needed it to. As he walked toward Sarah's car, porch light casting warm angles across his shoulders, I stood watching with a tangle of emotions in my chest. I couldn't shake the certainty that this was building toward something, that the real question, the one beneath all others, hadn't surfaced yet, and when it finally came, I wondered if I'd be prepared. 10 days later, the question arrived. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, one of those early October days when air grows crisp but sunlight still spills warmly through windows. I'd spent the morning in my garden, clearing away summer's final blooms, when Sarah called. She sounded exhausted, mentioned running errands across town, and asked if Michael could visit for a couple of hours. By now, these visits felt natural, but something in me sensed this one would be different, though I couldn't have explained why. Michael arrived with his hood up, hands buried in jacket pockets. No notebook this time, but his eyes carried that familiar, thoughtful weight I'd come to recognize. I welcomed him inside, prepared tea for both of us, and we settled at the kitchen table like that initial afternoon. For a while, we discussed ordinary things, his part-time job, a concert he'd attended, plans for winter break. But periodically, his gaze would hold mine longer than necessary, as if measuring whether this was the right moment. Eventually, our conversation drifted into natural silence. The wall clock's ticking seemed amplified in the stillness. Outside, a single leaf scraped across concrete in the breeze. Then he asked it, "Do you think people can actually change how they feel about someone they've known forever?" I studied his face carefully. "What exactly do you mean?" He held my eyes, voice quieter now. "I mean, what if you wake up one day and see them differently? Like they're more than you realized they were?" My breath caught, not from confusion, but from clarity. Too much clarity. There it was, the thing he'd been approaching for weeks. I leaned back slightly, buying myself time before responding. I think feelings can evolve. Sometimes because we've grown, sometimes because we notice things we missed before. But when that happens, it's crucial to distinguish between what's genuine and what's just a passing moment. He nodded slowly, weighing each word. "So, how do you tell the difference?" I sipped my tea to steady myself. Time. You let the feeling exist without rushing it. If it's real, it'll persist after you've had space to think. If it fades, then maybe it was temporary. Michael looked down at his hands, then back at me. "You've always been someone I admire, someone I feel safe with." I didn't realize that could transform into something else. Nothing inappropriate colored his tone, just raw honesty that made my chest tighten. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over his. "Michael," I said softly, "what you're experiencing right now is part of maturing. You're discovering how complex people can be, how they can matter to you in unexpected ways. That's not wrong, but it's something you need to give room to breathe, space to understand without acting hastily." He didn't withdraw his hand, but after a moment he nodded and offered a small, almost bashful smile. I guess I just didn't expect growing up to be this complicated. Most important things in life are, I replied, and that made him laugh. A small, genuine sound that felt like relief for both of us. When Sarah came to collect him later, he seemed lighter, like internal pressure had shifted. As I watched them leave, I felt the same lightness, because whatever was developing inside him, I knew I'd offered something valuable, a safe space to ask questions without judgment, and guidance he could carry forward without regret. That night, as the house settled into its evening stillness, I reflected on how moments like these shape us, how they're not always neat or comfortable, but they matter, sometimes more than we understand at the time. And I realized that while Michael's question had initially startled me, it had also reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten: the power of being truly seen and the responsibility that accompanies it.